And welcome back for session number 3. It's time for us to take a deep dive and discuss issues that really matter. This important session focuses on insights, confronting our challenges. These are candid insights on wealth and wage disparities, the correlation of mental wellness with financial well-being, and the challenge for long-term financial sustainability. This session will be moderated by Leida Speller. She's a financial advisor and certified financial planning practitioner for Apogee Financial Partners, and she's also a WEOP board member. Welcome, Ms. Speller.
Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay.
And Leida will be joined by Charmaine Davis, who is an experienced policy strategist, facilitator, and organizer. She serves as a Southeast Regional Administrator for the U.S. Department of Labor's Women's Bureau. Welcome to you, Charmaine.
Thank you, Lindsay.
And Rashida Winfrey is the Vice President for Atlanta Underserved Entrepreneurs with JP Morgan Chase. She's one of the sponsors of today's event. She's in the virtual orbit, so she will likely join Charmaine and Leida at some point. But I will now turn the virtual mic over to you, Leida.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here, Charmaine and Rashida, who again is in our virtual orbit, and to everyone who makes up the incredible WEOP community. So we are having this discussion because the gender wealth gap is real. If we look at something as simple as the retirement savings wealth gap, we will see, for example, that it continues to increase. So, for example, the latest data shows that for every 70 cents the average woman owns in retirement wealth, her male equivalent owns $1. And that's actually shown to be increasing. That gap is actually increasing post-COVID, or as we're kind of moving through this COVID phase. So if we use retirement wealth savings as an example, the gender savings or gender wealth gap continues to increase. Now, and that is despite women-owned business being the fastest growing new business segment in our country. They're the fastest in job creation, growing businesses in our country. And women are also climbing to the tip tops of the corporate ranks globally. But yet our male counterparts are accumulating more wealth and at a more accelerated rate than we are. And many factors contribute to this issue, but staying with our retirement wealth gap, for example, or retirement gender wealth gap, for example, one of the reasons why this gap continues to persist is because the gender pay gap persists. Now, we all have come for insights. And so I'm going to engage our incredible panel here this morning because far too many of us are not achieving the financial freedom that we enter into business or that we work hard to climb the corporate ranks to achieve. So, Ms. Charmaine Davis, we're going to start digging into some insights with you. And this is a two-part question. So one of the reasons the gender pay gap or gender wealth gap again persists is because the gender pay gap exists or persists. Can you just share some contributing factors to this gender wage gap, which appears to be a part of fueling this gender wealth gap? And then the second part of that question is, what are some possible solutions that could help us close that gender pay gap?
Thank you, Leida, for that question. So I'll begin by saying that you're absolutely correct. The wage gap does contribute greatly to the retirement gender wealth gap that we see. And it only makes sense that that would be the case. If you are a woman and you're earning 50% or 60% of what your male counterpart is earning throughout your entire career, then obviously you don't have the same opportunity to accumulate wealth as your male counterpart would. So let's talk about some of the factors that contribute to the wage gap. Some of the key factors that contribute to the wage gap are 1, occupational segregation, 2, the devaluing of work historically done by women, and 3, caregiving penalties in the workplace that disproportionately impact women. So let's begin with occupational segregation. I know that many people may not be familiar with that term, but occupational segregation basically means you see certain demographics over or underrepresented in certain occupations. So for example, women are overrepresented in childcare, retail, home healthcare. 90% of childcare workers are women. 30% of direct care workers are Black women. These are some of the lowest paying jobs, those direct care industries. But on contrast, women are underrepresented in those higher paying industries like finance, like construction, like technology and engineering. So occupational segregation accounts for about 42% of the gender wage gap. To help kind of illustrate this more, or really illuminate how occupational segregation contributes to the gender wage gap, the average salary of a child care worker is $25,000 a year. The average salary of someone who's working as an electrician is $56,000 a year. So one of those occupations is majority female dominated. Childcare is a majority female dominated industry, whereas electricians, many of them, the majority of them are males. So when you have women overrepresented in these lower paying occupations and underrepresented in the higher paying occupations, that's contributing to the gender wage gap. Next, I want to talk about the devaluing of work that has been historically done by women. Although I definitely want to encourage women to think about pursuing careers in higher paying, non-traditional occupations like engineering, science, technology, I don't want to minimize or devalue the importance of work that has been historically done by women. So during the pandemic, it really highlighted that our economy is very dependent on the work historically done by women, yet we simultaneously devalue that work. When COVID-19 hit, it illuminated that some of the lowest paid workers in our society are actually some of the most essential to our economy. Many of these essential workers are women. So the child care workers, the retail clerks, the nurses, the home health care workers, many of these occupations are majority female, but they're also very poorly compensated. So it's the devaluing of that essential work, the undercompensation of that essential work historically done by women that also contributes to the gender wage gap. And then lastly, I want to talk about those caregiving penalties in the workplace. So first of all, again, caregiving penalties may be a term that many people are just less familiar with, but it's the penalties that workers experience simply because they have caregiving responsibilities. So for example, if an employer penalizes a woman for needing to take time off to give birth and utilize maternity leave, that would be an example of a caregiver penalty. Or if a woman has to quit her job because she doesn't have access to paid maternity leave or that protection, that would be a caregiver penalty. Having to take time off to care for a sick child or elderly parent and being penalized in your workplace through either loss of compensation or being fired. Those are caregiver penalties in the workplace that disproportionately negatively impact women. So for me, when we talk about the contributing factors to the wage gap, it's the devaluing of work historically done by women. It's the occupational segregation that we continue to see, and it's those caregiving penalties that I just described. Now, part two of your question is, I love it because it's solution focused. And I think that when we're talking about the gender wage gap, we have to be focused on solutions. Like we know the problems, we know work done by people of color, women, it has been historically devalued. We know that lack of access to paid leave and those different caregiver penalties in the workplace, that all contributes to the gender wage gap. But what are the solutions? So for me, when talking about solutions, I like to think of what can a woman individually do to help combat the gender wage gap? And then what can we collectively do as just a society to help combat the gender wage gap? So one, what can women personally do to combat the gender wage gap? I think just like I said in my first few points, when we talk about occupational segregation, when women are choosing to go into fields that pay lower, like childcare, retail, home health care, that contributes to the gender wage gap. So I would encourage women to think outside the box and consider occupations and careers that maybe they weren't encouraged to look into as young women, as little girls. So seriously consider becoming an engineer, becoming an electrician, entering into the world of finance. Women are underrepresented in all of those industries, but a woman choosing to go into that industry will drastically increase her earning potential and will help to close that gender wage gap. Secondly, I want to talk about what can we collectively do? Like, what are the public policies that we can be supporting, that we can be lifting up, that would help to reduce the gender wage gap? So the first one is supporting those public policies, supporting legislation that reduces caregiving penalties. So one would be supporting policies that would expand access to job protected paid leave. If a woman knows that, you know what, I can take time off if I need to have a child, or I can take time off if I need to care for an elderly parent, or for my child, or for my spouse, without losing pay or without potentially being threatened with some disciplinary action, that helps to keep that woman in her job, and it puts her in position to continue to advance. But if a woman is losing her job because she had to step out of the labor force to have a child, or she was fired because she needed to take a day off because she had elder care responsibilities, that sets her behind. Those are days, those are weeks, those are years sometimes that she's out of the labor force, where she doesn't have the opportunity to advance in her career. So us collectively supporting policy that would expand access to paid leave, paid parental leave, that job protected leave. Secondly, I think we underestimate the role of not having access to childcare. So if a woman, or just a parent period, doesn't have access to quality and affordable childcare, they cannot leave and enter and engage in the labor force outside of their home, right? Like, if you don't have someone who can watch your child, or you can't afford to pay someone to watch your child, that keeps you out of the labor force. So us supporting public policy that would expand access to quality and affordable childcare, that would help to reduce some of those caregiver penalties. The second thing that we can do is support policy that bans the use of salary history when determining what you will compensate or pay a new hire. So, for example, I think many of us have had the experience of having to disclose how much we earned on our previous job while we're applying or interviewing for a new job. Now, that hurts women, and it hurts particularly women of color, because if we know women and women of color are being compensated less, by using their previous salary to determine their new salary, it just perpetuates that cycle of the gender wage gap. So one of the things we really push for at the Women's Bureau is to ban the use of salary history. Employers should be determining what they compensate employees based on their skills, their qualifications, what they bring to the table, not how much a previous employer paid them. And then lastly, I think we can support equal pay legislation like the Paycheck Fairness Act, which would ban the use of salary histories, and it would require employers to be more transparent about what they're paying their employees. And that helps because sometimes you don't know that you're being paid less than your male counterpart because you don't know what your male counterpart is earning. And so if employers are required to be more transparent about what they're paying or how they're compensating each position, then that actually gives working women the leverage to be able to negotiate for their salaries, or to just flag that, hey, I'm doing a very similar job to my male counterpart. He's being compensated $10,000 more a year than I am. We need to have a conversation about this. So those are some of the things that I think of when it comes to what are some possible solutions to the gender wage gap.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing those, Charmaine. Those are all powerful and such deep insights. So what if I am the woman who is sitting in a position and I feel as though it is now time and I am capable of bringing my gifts, talent, skills, values directly to the marketplace myself as an entrepreneur, right? Forget all of these barriers within, these corporate entities. I see a direct runway into the marketplace on my own, and I am going to try this vehicle of entrepreneurship in an attempt to generate more revenue in my business, right? To increase my income myself, and to also build my business entity as an asset for generational wealth transfer, et cetera. So what if that is the path that I see for myself? what are some of the ways in which I can be supported in taking that journey or making that transition?
Yeah. So, Leida, I would still flag, and you can talk to many of the entrepreneurs who are women of color. There is still a gap, right? Like there's still an income generation gap between white male entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs who are women of color. So I want to flag that. And some of that has to do with access to capital, just women of color, women in general, just having fewer opportunities and having less access or coming up against more barriers when it comes to accessing capital as an entrepreneur. But you're right, many women are seeing in the corporate world, working a traditional 9 to 5, I'm not being compensated my worth. And so we're seeing more women, specifically Black women, really leading the charge and shifting from 9 to 5s and pursuing entrepreneurship and opening up their own businesses, which I completely applaud. I think going into it, it's just like with anything, you need to be prepared as transitioning from a full-time worker to an entrepreneur, understanding your industry, understanding what is the unique value that you bring to the field, being very clear on what your niche is, and then also having business acumen, right? Like I'm not an entrepreneur and I don't claim to be an expert in that area, but I do just know some basic things that you need before transitioning from being like your traditional 9 to 5 worker to being a full-time entrepreneur. Is that it is very different from just having a skill and being able to do something. Like you can be a great cook. It doesn't mean that you're equipped to open up a restaurant. And so you need to invest in yourself. And I would recommend that women who are working those traditional 9 to 5 jobs while you have a steady paycheck, invest in yourself so that you can learn those business acumen skills, getting connected with organizations like WeOp so that you can better make that transition. I think as much as you can learn, as much expertise and knowledge that you can gain while somebody else is signing your paycheck and you're not solely dependent on your business to provide for you economically, the better. So trying to gain as much knowledge, equip yourself so that when you make that transition to being an entrepreneur full time, you've set yourself up and you've laid a good foundation to really succeed. So that includes doing research on your industry. Like I said, becoming really solid on what your niche is. And then also preparing financially, because most entrepreneurs will tell you there's definitely an extended period of time where you are not generating enough income to supply all of your needs. And so as much as you can save and kind of have your nest egg while you're working a traditional 9 to 5, I think that would be a good way to lay a nice foundation for you to make the transition.
Wow, that is great, Charmaine. Thank you so much. Such rich information and guidance to our audience, who, particularly those women who may be thinking about making that transition. I do want to shift gears just a little bit. Neither of us claim to be mental health professionals, right? It's certainly not what I do, and I know that it's not what you do. But so many of our challenges to our ability to accumulate wealth can be just, a result of our own mental states of being. And, a lot of the belief and value systems that drive our behaviors and our decisions around money and taking big leaps like entrepreneurship. Like, I think most entrepreneurships will be most entrepreneurs will be the first to tell us it is not for the faint of heart, right? So these things take not only important external resources that you just mentioned, the support, the financial preparedness, but the entrepreneurship takes a lot of internal resources, right? A lot of courage, a lot of determination, a lot of steadfastness. I mean, it takes so much out of us to be out in the world running businesses. Can you speak to, just through your work or through your reading or, through what you've seen and experienced around you, just some of the ways in which we may get in our own ways, right? And some ways in which maybe we can address those barriers to wealth building and exciting opportunities like entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Leida, because, Full-time, obviously, I work and I serve as the Southeast Regional Administrator for the U.S. Department of Labor's Women's Bureau, but I also do some career and life coaching with individual women. And one of the first things that I do is with each client, instead of just jumping right into like, what is your goal? Let's begin developing strategies to achieve that goal and working to see how I can better support them or hold them accountable to moving forward in their goals. I do like a 5-week just mindset coaching, because you're absolutely right. If you're going into something with a very defeated mindset, or if you have the habit of just these thought patterns where you're constantly telling yourself you're incompetent, you're not good enough, you're not this, you're not that, those things are going to come up and they're going to consistently be a hindrance to your goals. If you're seeing yourself as this, if you want to be the successful entrepreneur, you have to really embody that and see yourself as like, I am competent. I am able to balance my finances. I am innovative. I am able to come up with these creative ideas. Like, that's something that you truly have to believe about yourself before you can begin to walk it out. So it's one of the things that I do with the whole mindset coaching program, is to begin to identify what are those thoughts that are not in alignment with your goals, right? Like, if you are constantly telling yourself you're not this, you're not that, you can't do this, you're never going to be able to take actions that are contrary to that. So it first starts off with like having a very strong foundation. And that's why I like to focus on that mindset coaching, so that you can truly believe like, I am a successful entrepreneur. I am competent enough to do this. I do have the skills to do this. I can set goals, and I have the discipline and self-control to execute whatever strategies are necessary to achieve those goals. You have to truly believe that about yourself. And there's different steps that you can take to build your confidence. One of the things I say that the greatest thing that one person can do to increase their confidence is learning to have integrity with their word, right? Like, if you learn to keep your word to yourself, that will build your confidence to go on to do other things. So if you say, I'm going to start getting up at 6 a.m., if you break your word to yourself, that's going to deal a hard blow to your confidence, because you're going to say, if I couldn't keep my word and wake up at 6 a.m., how am I going to keep my word to exercise the discipline I need to be a successful entrepreneur? But if you learn to keep your word to yourself in those small things, it builds your confidence. If you keep your word that every morning I wake up at 6 a.m. and you're able to do that, it builds your confidence and belief that if I can wake up at 6 a.m., then I can go pitch this client. And if I can go pitch to this client, that may bring me a new customer. But we have to learn to keep our word to ourselves. And that will do more than you can even imagine in helping to boost your confidence. Because a lack of confidence is essentially you saying, I don't trust myself. I don't believe that I can do this. I don't believe in myself, right? So you have to build trust with yourself so that you can be confident to say, no, I set goals, I achieve them, and I believe that I can do so because I keep my word, and I have this laundry list of things that I can point to where I've kept my word and I've exercised discipline and I've been able to do it. But those are just that's an example. One of the things that I really emphasize when talking to clients and working with them about mindset coaching and learning to build confidence is that you have to learn to keep your word to yourself in the small things. And if you don't, it will continue to shatter and break down your confidence, because confidence is all about trust. And if you don't trust yourself, you're not going to be able to operate at a high level of confidence.
Charmaine, gosh, so much of what you've just said is really resonating with our audience. So thank you so much for sharing those nuggets. You know, I think it really underscores that building our long-term financial sustainability and our economic well-being is both an external job, right? There are activities that we need to be doing externally, but there's also oftentimes a lot of work that we could do, or opportunity to do some work internally to build up those resources so that we are manifesting, or that we are exhibiting externally what it is that we want to achieve, or doing the work externally to create and to achieve what it is that we want to achieve. So awesome discussion. Again, I think this discussion just, again, underscores that there are opportunities for us to do work both internally and externally. And I think we're both very excited to be a part of a community that is committed to helping us, supporting us in doing this work. So we're getting ready to close out in just a minute. So if you could just share with us, just what do you see on the horizon in terms of what's happening in your work to help us build this long-term financial stability or sustainability by building internal resources as well as external resources. And then I'm happy to share what's happening next in the WEOP community.
Yeah, I feel like simultaneously we're living in very hard and challenging times. Like we're still technically in the midst of a pandemic. Many of us have lost loved ones and friends. People have lost their jobs. It's been hard. And then on the opposite end, like it has really caused many of us to really take time and reflect, am I doing what I truly want to do? Which is a beautiful place to be when you can take that time and really think about it. So I think with the Women's Bureau, what we're seeing is that, and I think you mentioned this earlier, Leida, there have been a lot of women who either were forced out of the labor force or who've had to step out for a variety of reasons. And those women are now contemplating and thinking, do I want to re-enter into the labor force? Do I want to remain at home? And if I do re-enter into the labor force, what do I want that work experience to look like? And so I said that it's a good thing because even as we're hearing about worker shortages, we're hearing about so many women who have fallen out of the workforce or were forced out of the workforce. It's causing us to think it's not enough for us to just return to normal, but we need to reimagine what it means to work, like what we need to reimagine our work experience and what work life consists of. And I think that that's exciting because it's causing employers to think, man, I probably do need to offer paid leave or job protected leave, or maybe I do need to offer the option of having an on-site childcare. It's causing employers to be challenged about what do I need in order to address these worker shortages? What benefits should I offer? And then we as workers, I think, having stepped out or been forced out of labor force, we're seriously contemplating, like, what do I need to really be able to balance both my work responsibilities and my family and at home responsibilities? So to me, I say that it's an exciting time because I think it's an opportunity for us to really reimagine things. And at the Women's Bureau, that's something that we've been thinking about. Many of us before 2020 couldn't imagine working full time from home. But over the last year and a half, we've done it successfully. So is that something that more employers may want to consider doing so that they can kind of open up job opportunities for individuals who may be in different cities or may actually prefer to work from home, or it works for them better to do that? So that's one of the big things that the Women's Bureau is emphasizing, is that it's not enough for us just to return to normal. Normal didn't work for us when we were normal. As soon as a crisis like a pandemic hit, it forced so many women out of the labor force. It forced so many women to drop out. So normal doesn't really work in times of crisis. So how do we reimagine the work experience so that when hard times hit, we are still able to keep women in their jobs, still make sure that they're thriving and doing well, and still, are able to succeed and progress in their careers. So I would say that that's the biggest thing that I'm looking forward to, and the Women's Bureau is really pushing, is like, let's reimagine what work life looks like.
Thank you, Charmaine. That's awesome, exciting stuff. You'll have to keep us posted on the things that you guys are doing to support those initiatives. And I will just close out by saying, super excited that next year, starting in 2022, WEOP will be extremely intentional around their work to support women building financial sustainability externally, right? So we're leading a program, Living in Quad 2, and we'll talk more about that as the new year gets closer. But Living in Quad 2, which is helping women be more proactive and more intentional around building their own financial wellness and well-being, in addition to bringing some mental health initiative and programming to, again, acknowledge that some of our work is internal. And WEOP wants to be a leader, a thought leader, and just a leader in doing that work for women in our community. So again, excited that we're pairing those two initiatives to make us both stronger internally as well as externally at our wealth building efforts. So Charmaine, thank you so much for this conversation. It was very insightful. We are always, always grateful to have this time with you.
Definitely. I appreciate being able to be here and for the invitation.
Thank you so much to Leida for moderating that fantastic fireside chat with Charmaine. Just a note to all of you who are watching that Leida is working to educate and empower women about financial sustainability. So please make sure that you stay in touch with both Leida and Charmaine. And this time we're really going to give you a break so you can get some coffee, juice, maybe a bite to eat, and we will see you in 15 minutes. Don't forget, hashtag EE Women of Color for the next prize.